Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. I am your host, allenwyma. Today I'm with Shady Khalifa, I believe that's how you say your name, who is a Flutter developer and also a Rust developer. And the reason I brought him on the show is to actually talk more about how to integrate Rust in Flutter and also what he's doing with that. So, Shady, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Shady Khalifa. As Alan introduced me, I am a Rust developer mainly currently, and I worked with integrating Rust with Flutter recently. We started at Sunshine Foundation, which is like a decentralized foundation for doing bounty platform. This is what started all about. Then we all of our code base was in Rust already, so we needed to integrate it with some of the Flutter as our UI for mobile application. So we started looking on how to integrate them together, and along the way I created some of libraries like Dart binding for the generating Dart binding for your Flutter application. Uh, from the Rust functions, and also created some of cool libraries like allo isolate for calling into async functions from Rust into async Dart. Um, so that's it for brief introduction about me. I am currently working at Edgeware, which is like the next blockchain for smart contracts on Substrate. Uh, I'm working mainly on Rust there.
So, you're not doing very much Flutter anymore?
No, like currently the Flutter just for my side projects and some freelance work. So I am working on a side project called All Chat, which is like a casual chat application where like you get matched with random people from internet and start chatting right away. The cool thing about All Chat is sorry. The cool thing about all chat is it's end-to-end encrypted, and it is metadata free, so your privacy is just stays on your phone, but you can easily share it between each other in the chat. Like you share a message, and also it's end-to-end encrypted, and everything implemented in between Rust and Flutter. The encryption stuff is just pure Rust, and the UI is just Flutter, and along the way, I learned a lot about how to handle and make a zero allocation things between Rust and Flutter, so it's very fast and very optimal. Like the whole application is taking like 15 meg of memory or less while working on this. Maybe I will talk about this later during the talk about how to make it more efficient.
Okay. So, but how did you actually get started into Flutter? Because that's, obviously it seems like you're more of a Rust guy than a Flutter guy. Or how would you kind of
Yeah.
introduce yourself?
So I started back then when Flutter before 1.0 actually looks like what back then and 2018 I guess. I was curious about how to build a mobile application, so I was like jumping around between Android and iOS. Uh, I didn't really like how to build the UI because maybe I am because I am back-end engineer. I am not really good at building UIs. But what one thing that attracted me in Flutter is just super easy to build cool and easy and beautiful UIs using the Dart. Um, so this is like was my first like what is it? The first marketing or saying for Flutter, and building his UI is very easy, like composing widgets with each other. And then I started from there uh, and started working with the UI. So this like was the first step for me, and then I started building some side projects for clients when I was working freelance. One of them just a small social network app, and I don't know if they released it or not because I was working just for the UI and state management, and back then was the state management just using state and so on. No really cool things like GetX or Riverbot or Blockbuster.
Yeah, I know. There's so many choices right now. It's hard to say which one to use.
Yeah, for me, was start going with GitX because like was very easy to start with, and it was like some of the magic. Just like get the job done first. I actually started with it in my application, and then create. I will create a new version of it using block pattern because when the app is starting getting bigger, I felt like I am not in control of how things going, how to handle errors and etc. Just maybe not something wrong with GetX itself, but maybe for my lack of knowledge of how to make a solid state management solution.
So wait, now you basically use block pattern when you make your apps. Is that right?
Yes. I would start directly with block pattern because it's easier to reason about. This is how software works.
That's quite interesting because I mean I think I only met one other guy who's doing block. I'm also using block, but it seems many people moved on to Riverpod or even Qubit, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, yes. Actually, I would try Riverbud someday. Give it a try. But as you say, everything just it seems equal in a small application because maybe if your application is just two screens, three screens, which is not really interesting, you could go with just set state, the built-in Flutter state management. There is no need for external. But when the app is growing, you need like a solid architecture and solid state management. And I guess block pattern is one of them. Uh, this is just my opinion because I don't want to start a war of state management here.
Yeah, it's always a kind of a controversial question about which is the better one or which one somebody else should use, right?
Right.
The one thing I don't see so often is people actually really promoting provider. I feel, of course, it's promoted by Google, but I don't see a lot of people really going out there and saying, "Yeah, you have to use provider or whatever."
Yeah, I guess block library starting is built on top of provider right now. So you have like block provider widget, which is just the same as provider, I guess, but integrates well with the block pattern itself. So I also think think that Riverboard or other libraries. I never tried it, but I guess all of them just taking the same architecture as provider.
All right, so but how did you get into Rust, right? Because Rust is also, I mean, I don't know which one's more popular, Rust or Flutter. Maybe Flutter is, considering how
Yes,
kind of
Flutter
a
is.
easier entry. Yeah, it's a really easy entry kind of language, I would say. Well, what about Rust? Why did you start getting into Rust?
So Rust for me just was like way back then, like 2 or 3 years. I was like studying C++, but I felt it's so hard for me. Uh, and Rust was like starting, getting noticed. There was this project Servo and other cool projects Mozilla is doing with Rust. So I started looking into it. Was just reading the book. I like 2 months is reading the book, just no code. Uh, and I felt like was like the book is very good to start because it has a lot of information, and of course I was missing a lot of them. So after that I started building small side projects for me, like one of my hobbies just reverse engineering current softwares. So one of my friends, we started reverse engineering WhatsApp application and started building like a small clone of it, but without the UI, just a CLI using Rust, and it was very cool actually to see this. So most of my projects started as an open source side projects, and then I start getting jobs. Uh, Starting from Sunshine Foundation, was I working with Rust and Flutter, and then currently in Edgeware, I was working. Currently, I'm working mainly in Rust, and also all of my side projects, as I said, even the current side project, the old chat, which I guess I will open source soon when I launch it. It is the server is just written in Rust. Most of the components I use in the old chat itself, like the media toolkit, which is like a small toolkit for doing image pre-processing before sending it to the server. It's just built in Rust, which is super fast than the native image library in Dart. So it's just worth looking into.
Yeah, but Rust is also kind of a very niche language too, because I tried talking to people out here about Rust, and I quite like it. That's how I got to know who you are. And but it seems like a lot of people are just saying, no, it's not for me. I'd rather use C or C++. Not many people are actually looking for Rust people out here.
Yeah, it's hard. I agree with you. It's hard starting with Rust, but I guess the bending curve is just getting low as Rust is getting popular. A lot of tutorials, a lot of books, and a lot of things starting getting. And recently, I guess yesterday, Google started investing in Rust, and it is getting into the kernel of the Android. Also Linux, it's getting into the kernel, but only in the drivers, so Rust is starting getting popular as the big companies starting using it. Um, so yeah, mostly will in the future. I guess we will find more Rust developers, as we see like the C++ developers and so on.
So in Egypt, how is the Flutter community out there?
Yeah, there is a Flutter community in Egypt. Actually, there is a big Facebook group called Flutter Egypt, which is like have a lot of people starting uh, learning about Flutter. There is also intermediate people that have an experience, no experience in programming, and just starting way learning Dart and Flutter, which is good because it's very easy to start with. A lot of tutorials out there. And there is also the people that is working already with Android and iOS platforms have a good solid principle about mobile development. They also started Flutter and making other people learning Flutter. So there is already a big, and also they like do a lot of online meetings. I usually attend them, but yeah, but I guess I'm sure that there is maybe zero people using Flutter and Rust here in Egypt beside me.
You think there's zero people besides you using using Rust and Flutter?
Yeah, no, I mean here in Egypt, but I guess somewhere in the world there is a
Mm.
lot of people starting using it.
But why would you say that though?
Because Rust is not very popular here. Maybe like people that you can count on your hand that is already working with Rust. But I know some people is just starting learning Rust recently. I am mentor for them in Rust here in Egypt. But yeah, they're like like wrapping their head around it, and Rust is not the easy language to learn because it has a lot of
Yeah.
concepts. Also, you don't really manage the memory yourself.
Can you actually kind of give us an introduction to some of the concepts you think are super important to know about? Because I think, if I'm sure there is people out there who maybe are interested to probably speed up their program or do something special with something like C, but I would like for you to kind of give a
Yes.
quick introduction because it is quite different compared to C and C++.
Yeah, one of the selling point, of course, for us is just the memory safety, which is like the first thing all of the big company right now is serving for. So Rust has the memory safety. So the basic concept of the memory safety, I guess, is the ownership concept or the ownership principle. So you must learn how the rules of the ownership works, and once you have this, I guess you most of the Rust programming will be easy. And I don't say the ownership is just a blocking. There is also the data racing and a lot of things you usually do in other programming language and you didn't notice. Like in Java, I guess you can send values between thread and it will automatically have a reference count for it, or Swift, for example. But in Rust, you need to explicitly say that you need like a atomic reference count for your data, for example. But aside from that, just learn how the ownership works. Don't fight the board checker because if you fight the board checker, you will cry at the end. Just if you could like just slap clone everywhere and make it work, then think about how to remove these clones if it is not needed, of course. Because usually this is not really a big issue for us, but once you make it work, now you can optimize on it.
Yeah, I agree. It took me quite some time to wrap my head around the borrow check and everything else. Like I
Hmm.
felt like more than three-quarters of my day was just trying to figure out how the heck can I write this simple thing or what I think was
Hmm.
simple.
Yeah.
But after you get into it, it's like, okay, this is pretty easy and okay. And actually, I kind of feel bad when I do use the clone, but sometimes you have to use clone.
No, no, no. It is really, really the smart thing you can do. Just use clone at first. Of course, if the data structure is just cloning without mutating the data, because if you clone some data structure or some struct, for example, it's totally separate from the original one. So you can't clone and then mutate. Of course, it will not mutate the old copy. But anyway, starting with clones is just the first thing you can do to make it work. And even for me, after years of working with Rust, I still have some problem with bullet checker recently, but it's not an issue because, of course, the lifetime issues you will get in when you're writing really solid software. You will face a lot of issue about this. But for simple things, just start with clones and make it work, then optimize.
Okay. It's a good plan. Yeah, I just feel weird because I know that every time I write clone, it's going to allocate memory and everything else. So I always try to be as fast as possible. But Rust is already so fast
Yeah.
because like I came from a lot of scripting languages, so like I know when you allocate memory, it's not good. But I suppose with allocating memory with Rust is much better than allocating with like Python or Ruby.
Yeah, mostly because in Python and any other scripting language, you mostly will have a GC, which is have like how and when to decide to remove this memory you don't need. But in Rust, just there is no GC, so mostly the values will be dropped when it goes out of the scope. And
What?
really, really, one selling point for this is just compiler will hint you how to do things. The error message is fascinating. Steven is doing really good in this, and all the Rust community, of course.
So can you give us some more hints and tips and tricks about Rust for people who maybe are thinking about to? I mean, they may listen to this podcast and say, okay, let me give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
So can you have anything
So
for us?
one thing I guess is mostly for newbies starting with Rust. Just start with the book. It's really really good resource. It is outlines and taking you step by step how Rust and how it differs from other language. So the book is really a good start. Then there is like what's called a Rust links repo in GitHub in the Rust repository. This
Sorry,
like
I
a
want to
small,
ask you. I want to ask you a quick question. Sorry to cut you off, but you said the book. Can you explain which book is the book?
the official Rust book. It's free and open source in the Rustlang. I guess it's like docs.rustlang.org/book. I guess. Uh, but anyway, it's the original book and it's updated when the language changes. So I guess you start off with this. Then you can grab off the Rustling's repo, which is like a small example in different things. Takes you about the types, how the syntax, and what errors you need to fix. It's just a small examples. It is broken examples, of course, and you need to fix it. And it's really really helpful. It takes you a lot of things around the language and they make you familiar with. If you completed these two steps, I guess you already know most of things you need to work and start things. The third step, I guess, is the best thing. If you have an already application written in other language, say JavaScript, for example, a script in JavaScript, try to convert it to Rust. And of course, you will fail at first. This is like nothing wrong here because you'll in Rust you need to try to your head around the data is just different than the structure of the data itself. So this is the first thing you will need to do, and I guess after doing this you will be very familiar with the Rust syntax and how to build things.
Yeah, there's also like some other books that go into some more interesting topics, like the what is it? I think there's like a Necronomicon or something. I can't remember now. And the
Yeah,
async book.
this is just like very advanced topics. I guess you will not touch them at the beginning. Uh, the the nightly book, not the nightly book. The what do they call it? Yeah, as you said, it is very dangerous book about the things that's weird in Rust and how to get around it. And including me, I really rarely go there like to see small things, but I didn't really read all of that, of course, because it is like the rare things you will encounter while working with Rust. It's not like normally you will need to look there. And the async book, of course, if you're starting doing async things, uh, I should mention that async Rust is getting it was MVP, of course, from 2018, and they starting doing a lot of things interesting right now. So if you have time and you have a story about async Rust and maybe how do you do things and struggle with, I guess it's a good time to bring this up to the Rust Lang team so they can improve it.
Yeah, the thing about the async Rust is I feel a little bit strange because you have to actually like pull in a runtime in order to actually run the async Rust, which to me this doesn't really make sense. Like it's like the language is lacking something, which they're also trying to promote, right? So maybe what's your input on this actually?
So
maybe you
this
can
is
maybe you
like a
can give
very
a
strange.
background. Sorry, maybe you can give a background about this because like I'm not giving enough background. Of course, you and I both know what we're talking about, but do you
Yeah.
mind?
So in Rust there is like you're working with like bare bones language. This is like when you really work with bare bone language, but it's really high level and zero cost abstraction. But when it comes to a runtime for things, I guess I need to explain first how async Rust works. In normal languages like JavaScript, you have like the promise, and there is an event loop running in the V8 engine. So this is like the push based. Every time the event loop just push the promise to the completion. In Rust, it's like the reverse, I guess. It is a ball based. Every time it's called future in Rust, not promise, but it is could be act the same. In the future in Rust, just the runtime needs also to poll the future, but instead it will ask them, is this completed yet? And the future could return either value of 2. It is not ready, or just it's ready with the value you ask it for. So basically, the runtime is just a big event loop that can schedule tasks, and every time it will poll it until it to complete. So in Rust, there is no runtime included in the standard library, so you need like bring in your favorite runtime, and there is a lot of them. Not a lot, like the popular them is just 3 or 2. But for example, I could give 2 examples or 3 examples. The async standard library or async CD, and there is also Tokyo runtime, which is very popular right now. And also there is called the small runtime, and there is also Piston. So you hear it like there is a lot of runtimes out there, and you can bring it and customize it as you like, so it fits your needs, which is like very good option when you have like really high performance application and you need to turn the runtime and the future of it and the synchronous of it. So you could also run your own runtime, or just bring in and customize some runtime out there.
Let me ask you this question: like, why doesn't the Rust team just create a runtime that everybody uses? Why is it that we have to have all these different runtimes, and how do we choose which one we want to use?
Mm-hmm. So it is really complicated in this. I guess I have too much input in this, but I guess one thing in the future, which I hope, currently you can like switch allocators in the standard library. So or your program, for example, if I have like a custom memory allocator that is more efficient than the system one, you can like, for example, the GM, I don't remember the name, GMolog, I guess. So this is like very popular, and it was the standard one in the Rust standard library before they remove it and make it a separate crate or a package. So this is like a very neat idea. Like I have an application which allocate a lot of memory, and I need to optimize it more, so I can switch the system one with a custom memory allocator, and it is really good, and it work with just one line of code without changing anything in your program. So I guess in the future there will be like a way to switch runtimes with a trait defined in the standard library, for example, for it. Like back then before Rust MVP, the future trait for which is not included in the standard library by the way, it's included in the core. It was inaccurate called the futures, and then when Rust standard the async await syntax, they added the future to the core of the Rust itself. So the future is just a trait that have a method called poll, which will poll your future until completion. So I guess my input, the last input in this, in the future, this is like a best way to think about. And there is also like another effort to bring to make a crate called agnostic, which is has like a feature flags you can switch on, and without changing your code, you can switch between the runtimes and test your code.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty interesting. I do know that they were looking at opening up the allocators, and I'm sure that's in. Is that actually in stable now or no?
No, it's
I'm not too
stable.
sure.
You can switch allocators. It's stable.
Stable, you can. Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think that's pretty recent too, right? I think within
No,
6 months ago or something.
No, it is not recent. I guess it's very back then when Rust started.
Okay.
One thing cool about this Rust document, you can like search about thing, and you see like in the left corner or the right corner, it say like stable since and a Rust version. So it's maybe it's stable from 1.0. I don't remember actually.
Yeah. Okay. That makes some sense now. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, I think Rust is really like a game changer, and I'm glad that other people are looking at it. And the fact that Google is thinking about putting in, well, they're not thinking, they're doing it, as far as I understand, right? And they're putting it into Android, and also Amazon, right? They built the Firecracker and some other things.
Yes. And if it even going to the Linux kernel itself.
Yeah, I was gonna say next is the Linux kernel is probably the biggest one, because everybody knows how picky Linus is, right? So if Linus is like, okay, this is good, that's just it must really be good. It must really be good, in my opinion.
Yes. So hopefully it will start getting out there for everything. So besides this, we are using it for our small applications to turn things that is really not fast in Dart itself, or you really need to get as low level as possible. Or of course, the first use case, you already have a code running in Rust and you need to bring it to your mobile application, for example. So it's like this was my first case. It's not just a performance thing.
Okay. But now I would like to kind of go back into like the main topic, right? Like the coolest thing, right? So let me kind of like go back to how I kind of found you. Is that for me, I always was interested in systems level programming and like low level programming. And I think Rust is the first language that I really feel, okay, I can do this. And not only can I do it, but this is actually a tool that professionals use. And so I kind of feel like a little bit of a hacker myself,
Yeah, it's like a fearless making system programming available for everyone. Just like the Solog for Rust, of course. Solong.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the reason that I'm looking at this is because like I think that there is times when you're going to have native performance. Actually, I'm actually using Rust in a production product right now.
Nice.
Not with Flutter, but with another technology, Elixir. So like I'm pulling in XML files. I'm actually creating PHP files with this. And I took like total processing time, I think went from like 10 minutes down to like 10 seconds. It's amazing. Like the performance I got. Yeah. It's really amazing. Right. And, so I can really see the power of this thing. And the reason actually I looked at this was because, okay, after that project, I became much more confident using Rust. And I got a project in from these guys, and they said, hey, we really want a desktop Windows application, and we think that you can help us. And I'm like to myself, okay, I don't really want to write C#. I do like Rust. What if I can create like this stuff using Rust, right? And I started looking at the GUI programming, and then I looked back and said, oh, wait a minute, isn't Flutter, I think around that time actually came out with saying, hey, we can actually start doing desktop apps.
Yeah.
And so I look at that, I'm like, yeah, sorry, go ahead. What are you saying?
was beta on macOS back then. It's now stable with Flutter
Yes, well,
2.0. Yeah,
stabler, right? They still say it's quite beta, but it's
yeah,
in any case, right? So I gave it a try, and the way I gave it a try was I just did searching. I said Flutter and Rust, and two things came up. The first one I think I ran into was actually a totally separate project, which is actually all about Flutter and Rust only. They had like their own generator, everything like that. I think it's called Flutter Rust or something. I'm not quite sure. Maybe you've probably seen it before.
Flutter Rust.
Something like that. I forgot the name of the product now. I think it's Flutter RS, maybe.
Yeah, Flutter RS. Actually, the
Yeah,
guy who was working with the Flutter RS was working with me in Sunshine Foundation. We contributed back to Flutter RS. It was for
really.
building desktop application. But for our use case was, I guess it's not active. I'm not sure Flutter RS is still active.
Let me see. Oh yeah, August 14th. How come it became inactive, right? Because it seemed like when I was looking at this stuff, it around that time, I think must have been around this time. Why like to me, the thing I didn't quite understand is why is it that you have to use its own template in order to actually use it?
Yeah, like it has the binding for the engine and the binding for other UI binding. I guess it is not quite active as much as it was. I contributed back to this project. I added some things to it, but nonetheless, I guess it's now easier for just building the Flutter desktop application than back then, because you back then you will have like getting your embedder or just what is it called? I don't remember the name. Just the shell. You need to build your own shell for hosting the Flutter UI. But
Oh,
now, but now was easy. Now it is easier than back then.
is that the GLFW? Is that what you do to make the
Yeah,
shell, or
this is
okay?
like the UI for.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'm trying to look at making video games and I keep seeing this GLFW keep popping
It's
up.
right
So
library
I
for
took yeah,
graphics.
okay. Yeah, so I looked at that one. That one was actually I was thinking about checking it out, but of course I didn't. And then I ran into your article. You had two of them.
Yeah.
And the first one was just the basic one, right? Because there's two that I can think of. The first one is all about how to kind of set up everything from scratch. I forgot what you
Hmm.
did for your project, but it was very simple. But I could understand what's going on.
Yes. Second one was how to get asynchronous Rust to
Yeah.
the synchronous Dart, because
Yeah.
it was really not easy for doing so.
Well, the first one was, of course, the most helpful because that's kind of really the
Yeah.
beginner, right? And that one was all
Yes.
about add function, right?
Mm-hmm. Just
Yeah.
doing add numbers, but it brings out there you can add more and like step by step.
Yeah. So how did you like discover how to do all this stuff? Did you read something or are you just trying things out or what?
Yeah, I really read a lot, but not just articles. I to
Well,
understand
let's start from
how
the ad first, right? I want to talk about the
yeah
ad one first, and then we can talk about the async one because that one is, of course, super interesting. But sorry,
yeah
let's start from the ad.
with at first there was already an example how to integrate CFFI with Dart, and it was like in the documentation, official documentation with Dart. And then I read, yeah, this is interesting. And there is also the example of adding two numbers and returning it back. But you will have to write your binding yourself. You will have to doing your stuff. And if you have memory allocation, this is like not an easy as possible. So I just made a simple example and it worked. And in the first try, because once I compiled Rust and make it work like this, build like a shared library with Rust. I could load it from Dart and then call a function. But then there is a lot of things that came up. How do I allocate memory? How do I free this memory? I already have some experience with FFI between C and Rust. So I thought like Dart just like an interface to C, so it could also work with Rust. And the same tools I used for doing between C and Rust, I could also use it for between Rust and Dart, and it worked. Generating header files from Rust to the C header file. It is already there. Like there is a library called cPyNGen, And but the cool thing, how I could take this header file and generate a Dart binding from it without doing this manually. And that's how it came to Dart binding itself.
Yeah, I remember when I did it, I used the cbind. Actually, I don't know if you remember, but I was the one who created an issue about the LLVM stuff. That was me. I don't know if you remember that, but that was me.
Nice.
So I had an issue with it. So I ended up just using cbind, and that just worked out of the box. It was great.
And the Dart binding stuff, it's now deprecated because back then there was no tool to generate Dart binding between C. And then there's these people from Google or Dart team said that they would make a tool, and they actually emailed me about their tool and how I feel about it, and I should give it a try actually, and it worked. Like if I gen, it's better than Dart binding now, because one thing just get a lot of maintenance from Dart team itself, and when they update Dart FFI, they also will update FFI gen, which is a tool for doing the same job as Dart binding itself. So I just okay, I guess I will deprecate Dart binding in favor of use the official one from Dart team itself.
So that one's called the FFI gen, right?
Yes, from Dart team.
You know what's funny? I just looked it up right now. It's actually using basically the same same thing that you did. Did they steal that from you, or was it you stole from them, or what?
No, I built Dart binding before they built FFI gen.
So they copied your example then, because their example is the summary, is the sum function. That's why I'm asking.
Because sum function just a common example. When you're doing something interesting between FFI, just you start with the add function.
Oh, why not just multiply or subtraction?
Maybe, but the add function or any just thing related to numbers, there is no allocation, so they don't bother you with allocations or memory management, because memory management between FFI is really hard. You need be careful about this, because once you write unsafe Rust, just there is a lot of compiler checking just unlocked, so you need to be careful. That's why I created a lot of libraries like the allo isolate, for example, to take care of all this. Like you give it the value you want or the future you want, and it will do all the memory management for you.
Oh yeah, actually, so I want to talk about two things, but I guess we should probably stick along with your tutorials first, and then we can talk about this later on. Now, I guess it also is with your second tutorial, right? So the second tutorial was really so powerful to me,
yes,
because actually the way Dart and how do I say this? The way Dart works is very different. It's similar to what I usually use, which is Elixir or Erlang.
Yeah.
And the fact that they have this kind of actor pattern, right, with these isolates.
Yes,
isolates are so strange, but maybe why don't you just introduce what you did, because to me that was really powerful.
Yeah. So first thing first, we have our app or just Rust application, which has an async std or Tokyo runtime, and we are using async Rust all the way down to the lowest stack we have. So now I need to use this in our Flutter application, and if you know the Rust async or anything async, and when you give it a value, you need to await or just block until the value you get back. But now, what is the benefit from async then? If I have to block the current thread to wait until the value I get it, now what is the value of using async in the first place? Just use sync calls. So I needed to think about this. How do I do a call, and then back after I do this call, when the future resolves, or in JavaScript terms, when the promise resolves, I get a notification or just I get a value back. So there is no articles for this, or was almost no documentation and no examples for doing sync calls. There was some of GitHub issues around this, and I started getting hints. And I actually interesting about building asynchronous. You need like binding between your FFI and the Dart VM itself, and this is like a separate thing from the Flutter engine. So the Dart VM has this function called Dart underscore post CF so C API, I guess, and this function takes what's called a port number and a value. And what is a port number? It is just a number that is not really a port or a network port. Think of it like you have a map between a number and a function to execute when you get this number from the map. Okay, this is like the simplest thing you can, but it's complicated than that, because to understand how it works, I really downloaded the Dart VM code and start looking at how it works. And there was a lot of C++ abstractions there.
Wait, so you actually started digging through the Dart VM to really get an idea about how you can create this?
Yeah, of course. And because it was really interesting, because when you send value over this port number, the value is getting copied. And now I need to understand, do I need to free my value after sending it, or just wait until call a function to free the value it received it? So I need to know how the ownership between the values, and there is almost no documentation about this and no examples. So I start digging into the VM itself and see how the value is received, how it is sanitized. It's like the value, of course, is just a big union, a big C union. It has a different variant. Every variant has a type, like you send like a number, a string, a vector of bytes, for example, everything. And I started this allo isolate project, just a library where you can like you can use it to send values over isolates to Rust. So the first thing you need to do is just start a separate isolate, which is a different isolate than the main isolate, which is like a different thread than the main thread, so you don't really block the UI. And then in this isolate, you send values between Rust and Dart, and it works like magic between them, because allow it takes care of all of C stuff and binding between VM and Rust.
So for that plugin, right, you created a separate isolate that all the code runs into. So what's the relationship between isolates and like threads? This is like difficult for me to wrap around.
Yeah, the threads can actually, in language like Rust, threads can share memory between them. Like you can have a memory in the main thread, and you, for example, you have two threads running. You can have this memory shared between those two threads, and both of them can write to this memory. And of course, this will require looking, like you look the memory before reading or before writing to it. But in Dart, because managing memory and data racing between two threads is hard, and of course this is like maybe very advanced topic for a mobile developer to managing threads, because it's like low level, for example. So they have this concept of isolates, which is like a separate VM isolate, or a separate, think of it as a separate thread, but you can share memory between this and the main thread. So the variables declared in the main thread is not accessible from the isolate itself. It's like a different thing. And to share memory between them, you do this by message passing. You will have every isolate have its own port, or it's have like a channel, and you send a message to this channel, and in the port, in this isolate you will receive the value, and you can also send back to the main thread or the caller. This actually work as the web workers if you work with them. Web worker have the same mechanism.
Yeah, but this is basically how like the actor model works, right?
Yes. Sharing memory by message passing.
Well, not really sharing memory, right? You're just copying. You're sending a copy over, right?
Yeah, a copy. Yes, a copy. In our case, to optimize things, I guess in allo isolate, I sharing pointer between them, which is very unsafe. I should admit it's very unsafe to share just a pointer, and I can drift this pointer from the dart side. But this is like way better to optimize things, and I don't really advise people to use it. I market this function as unsafe. But yes, sharing memory without copying is like dangerous. But yeah, you need like a very good VM to say that if this memory is not accessible anymore in the main thread, why not just have like it moved away to the isolate itself instead of keeping it in the main isolate and to copying it. Maybe there's like a lot of magic happens there to make it optimized.
But sorry, I think I asked the question, but maybe I didn't get a clear answer. Maybe I missed it. But what's the relation between an isolate and a thread within the
Yeah.
Dart VM?
Okay. I guess I could simplify this. As I said, it could be considered the same, but in Dart there is two thread pools. One called an IO thread pool, which is a pool that is running of multiple threads for TCP connection, for example, doing HTTP calls, for example, in your application, reading files. Everything is related to IO. There is a separate pool for it, and there is also which is the main thread. It has the main event loop, which is executing your future and everything. So if you created a new isolate, you will actually create a new event loop for a separate from the main one.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, like creating a small VM besides the main one. But it's
Okay.
not really that heavyweight, just a lightweight EVM, lightweight VM. Sorry.
Okay, so that thread pool, okay. All right, I understand how it works now. This is like extremely similar to Elixir and Erlang, is that they have this idea of schedulers, and so what they do is they start up one scheduler per core you have on your machine, and also a separate bunch of schedulers just for I/O. And every time you have a process, that'll be running on some scheduler, and you don't know which one it is. So the isolate sounds very much like a process in Erlang and Elixir, and the scheduler sounds a lot like what you call the threads, right, or thread pool. But of course, each thread would be a separate one. So it's quite interesting how well this actually maps, and I can totally understand how this thing can scale, because like WhatsApp, which runs on this kind of system, is just scales like crazy.
Yes.
It's like 2 million people on one server.
Mm-hmm. One thing, I guess, as a Flutter developer, you actually don't really need to create your own isolates. You rarely need to create more than the main thread or the main isolate for your Flutter application to run. But if you do, like, for example, you have a very function that could block the main thread, which of course will block your UI, better just use another thread, another isolate. And there is like this neat function inside the Flutter framework itself. It's called compute. It takes a function that runs and the parameters for it, and it will run it off the main isolate, in another isolate, for example, and then it will bring back the response as usually called the main function itself. This is like really neat function I used a lot in my application. For example, when resizing pictures or doing a compression for the picture or the image you're sending, or for example, processing a video. Of course, you don't really need to do this in the main thread itself because it will block the UI. So you better running it off another isolate. And the easiest way to do so, just use the compute function from the Flutter framework itself.
What's the name of this function called?
Compute, called compute, like actually computing.
Okay, I've never heard this before. Compute property from the foundation?
Yes. It takes like a callback to call in another isolate, and a message which is the parameter to this function, and it will return back the value.
So this will actually turn on a separate isolate, do your work, and then come back to the main thread. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Wow. Okay. This is really interesting. I'm actually Well, actually, I don't have anything too powerful to run, but
Yeah,
this is pretty cool.
yeah. I just mentioned some of use cases for this, but yes.
Okay. So this is like basically abstracting the idea of the isolate and message passing. You have all that
Mm.
basically within one function that anybody
Yeah,
can use.
and very easy to and convenient to use. And there is also this
Yeah, I totally.
this library. I don't remember this name. It has like called an isolate pool, which will create like for isolate, for example, in the background, and it's starting like a work stealing mechanism where like you submit tasks to the isolate pool to start working on them, and the like the idle isolate will start stealing tasks from the queue you have. And it's like really powerful when you're doing maybe, for example, bunch resizing of images, or just you have a lot of files you need to convert them to PDF, for example. This is like really powerful when you really do a heavy CPU work. But for just IO work, there is no really need because you already have like the VM already have a thread pool for it.
But how do you select, like, what if you have something that is heavy, very heavy IO? Like, can you actually select which type of thread you want to run on or which thread pool to use? Or is it that the Dart VM will schedule that based on what it can see in the isolate or
Yeah,
what?
it's like all abstracted, but you basically you can create your own isolate and then post messages to it and to get result back. So what allo isolate actually do is just when you need to call into Rust, they have like this called what's called in Dart there is what's called a future and what's called a completer. A completer basically can wrap a function or wrap a call, and it has like a complete function with the value or just error with the error value, for example, similar to the future actually. So what I do is just have a completer with the expected type that's gonna be returned from the Rust side, and then from this completer I create a port, just a raw port from the Dart VM itself from Dart, and then send this port and the completer itself to Rust, and then Rust can actually do the asynchronous work, and then when it is done, it will post the value back at this port. Uh, and I guess the misconception about ports here, it is not really a network port, as I said in the first. It's just imagine it like a hash map or a map between a port number, just a number, and a function to call once this port getting it. So it will be called with the result. So it's just to clarify what this port is.
Okay. I do have one question, right? Now that you're talking about this completer and future stuff,
Mhm.
I get kind of confused. Like sometimes I need to use a completer, sometimes I get a future. And then I do say that you can create a future with a constructor, but at the same time, you can also just mark a function as async, and you have to actually say it's a future
Yes.
coming back. How?
Mhm.
Wow, this is so confusing to me. Maybe you can help me to understand like
Yes.
what's going on over here.
Okay. One thing just about this, if you mostly and for if like 90% of your sync Dart will use just mark a function as a sync and it will return a future and you good to go. But when you have like when you need to return a future itself, like from a synchronous function or asynchronous function, you need just to return a future, not to return a value that is resolved from a future, which is like a different thing. And when you to return a future that is resolved to the value, so that's where you need like to have the completer. You create a completer, just like a constructor for the future, as you said, and give it like this is the value and this is the error, and here is the future, and it is returned from my function. Then the caller will await for the future from this completer, and it has nothing to do with using the async call itself. So the basic answer, if you need to return a future, not the value itself, you could use the completer, and to return a future, just use the async modifier for the function itself.
Okay, I think I got it.
I made some example in Ala Isolate, for example, to doing so, and we have like entire repo running Flutter application using this technique between Ala Isolate and Flutter completer. Sorry, Dart completer.
Do you think that Dart team will actually start to bring more Rust in? Because I mean, you see that people are starting to use it a lot more now.
You mean like bring Rust inside the Dart itself, or just add example for it?
I think maybe they're trying to push FFI a little bit, right? Or at least they're definitely
Yes.
want people to use it because they've been working on it for a long time. Like, do you think
Hmm.
that they'll just eventually just say, hey, let's actually have some dedicated like tutorials about how we can bring Rust in, or we can actually make it more official? Because it seems like all the code that all the examples that they all have is all about C and C++.
Yes, I guess in the future, because there is an entire operating system Google is working on called Fuchsia, which is has its own UI built in with Flutter and Dart. Like the Dart is just maybe the Dart is the main language for Fuchsia itself, and for the backend language or the low level languages there is a C++, there is Rust, and I guess there is also C, but I don't really know. But Rust is one of the support language, and of course there is Dart. So there is like, of course there is will be example how to interact between them in the Fuchsia itself when Google like pushing for it.
I got another question for you. What do you think about? I lost my train of thought. Okay, actually, this is what I wanted to ask you. So, Dart actually already compiles to native code. Like, what's the point to even bring in Rust if Dart's basically already native, right? Like, what is the benefit?
Hmm. So as I said, one thing you need to consider when using Rust inside your Flutter application or Dart application, it's just you have already an ecosystem there, or you have already an app that's running Rust. For our case, there's already our application, or the back end for our application is just Rust. So we need to bring that inside the Flutter app. That's why we consider this. But nonetheless, Dart is so fast. Uh, it's considered fast because it's compiled to the native code itself. Uh, but as I said, Zach, there is a difference between things here. The simple answer: Rust doesn't have a garbage collector. There is no memory management, and it like zero cost abstraction. So whenever you do using traits and using structs and enums, for example, and the feature for us, of course, this will compile down to as efficient as possible machine code. But in Dart, I guess there is none of that. It has already a garbage collector, which is good garbage collector, and of course the abstraction is not zero cost because it's like some sort of dynamic language. But as I said, there's a difference between the same program written in Rust and written in Dart, although they both compile to the same machine code. It's compiled to the machine code, but the generated code will of course differ between the language. Dart it has its own compiler, but Rust uses LLVM, which a whole new level of compiler infrastructure that is used by CLang, for example.
Okay, so actually, although it's compiled natively, it's actually still using a VM underneath to run.
Hmm. Not,
Okay,
not like a VM, just could be a subset of VMs that you are using,
I
or a
see.
thing that you are using. But in general, uh, there is a lot of abstraction there, and of course there is a cost for this abstraction. Like they say, for example, if you are using a function that returns a widget inside your Flutter widget tree, this is not efficient as just using the widget itself. So you see there is like a lot of things that's coming out about this.
Do you think that FFI became any better now that Flutter 2.0 kind of came out? Was there any benefits inside of Flutter 2?
Yes, I really believe in FFI and Flutter will boost Flutter to the moon. There is this library called WinAPI 32, which you can like building your Flutter application to interact directly with Windows APIs. And there is also, of course, there is will be in the future binding to the native libc calls. So you can just, instead of using writing your own functions in C and then binding it to Dart, there will be already a package just like binding for it directly, and you can call the native libc library, libc calls from your Flutter application itself or your Dart application. And one thing I guess in the future it will change, and this pretty soon. They are looking for building an HTTP server for Dart, so you can use Dart in the back end, and they are looking for using FFI for that. So your HTTP server itself is written in C and C++, for example, and you will have a Dart binding between it and your. You can like build a back end application in Dart too. And I guess I want one thing to add here about the HTTP server. The optimal thing, you can use an HTTP server for it, like on Hyper RS, which is including the CFFI right now in review, and it's already added to curl command line.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so it has
Yeah.
curl has a Hyper backend right now to support HTTP2 and Rust TLS to support better TLS than OpenSSL. But of course, it has like two backends.
Yeah, what actually happened? I do remember this, that there was kind of a big deal that curl was pulling in Rust now for TLS.
Yes.
So is that because of like things like Heartbleed that they wanted to kind of stay safe, or what happened?
Yes, this one of things, like they closed a lot of bugs and closed a lot of issues about memory bugs in OpenSSL and when using Rust TLS, for example. So you see, like there is a lot of things pushing Rust to the mainstream tools we already use.
Okay. I know we kind of a little bit went over time, but is there anything that you wanted to kind of talk about before we kind of start to wrap up?
Yeah, I guess last thing I could say about Rust and the Flutter, just there is a lot of jobs about Rust out there, so it is not as they said, if you learn it, you will not get a job in Rust. But I would say no. There is a lot of people requiring Rust job, so better learn it now. Using Flutter with Rust is a good way to optimize your Flutter application. For example, my use case I use the Dart native library called Emag, and it was not that as fast as Emag library in Rust. So I made a binding between them, and I open sourced it in the old chat repo. So I guess that's it. I hope everyone learned something today.
You know what I was thinking of recently? Like I was thinking, I when I did this app I told you about before, I made a version for Mac and a version for Windows. What I was thinking is, now that Flutter Web is also like production, like what if you can use Rust to also export a WASM file and somehow link that in, so that way you kind of got everything with one language?
Yes, this is actually a good way, and I need to try it, because currently Rust pushing a lot for WASM, and there is a lot of application out there using WebAssembly for posting, including my company. I work with WASM and Rust. So there is this tool called WASM Bindgen, which will generate a JavaScript bindgen for your Rust functions. You can call from, also will generate TypeScript binding for you too. So one thing to do so, just use Rust to write your WASM and generate a JavaScript file for it using WASM bindgen, for example. And then from Dart web, I guess you can call any JavaScript function that's loaded inside the browser itself. So I guess there is a way to call from Dart in JavaScript, and then from JavaScript to WASM. There is an overhead, of course, but hopefully this Dart compiler will compile for optimized JavaScript, so there is no really overhead here.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. I think that you can write kind of your native fast code in Rust and export to everything, and then with Dart able to also run everywhere, it's like, wow, you got everything you need. I
So
think
like
you got a beautiful UI, and you got your fast stuff. I mean, it's always hard to get the two at the same time, but this would really be
yes,
worth it.
this is like this is what was my recommendation for anyone want to build a good UI in everywhere and a good performance and the safe languages. Just use Dart and Rust for that. And of course, not everything just written
Yeah,
in
I think
Rust. You
so.
can like your business logic in Rust and binding it to Dart and write your beautiful UI.
Yeah, I also agree with the same. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're a busy guy. Uh, I want to ask you, this is like my final question. So usually I ask about state management, but that is already clear, right? That you like to use block and you're thinking about using
Yeah.
Riverpod, etc. But now I think my last question would just be, as somebody who's been using Flutter for some time, do you have any tips or tricks for beginners and also any warnings for them too as they're starting to get along on their journey with Flutter?
One thing I guess, just build your app as you want. Like don't care too much about the file structure, because a lot of Flutter people are scaring how to structure my application, where to put. Should I use MVC for example, or just use any other program for building mobile application? Just don't think about this as much at the beginning. If you are starting building your application, just write your code, um, and make it work, and see if your result just and your concept is working as you imagined. Implementing your UI first, of course. So that's it, of course, and then just optimize your workflow and then move things around as you see. Uh, so for me, I built all chat at first using just everything in small files, and then I using GitX to make a proof of concept for my application, because I was building the back end and the front end at the same time. So I need to make sure everything is working as I intended. And then as I said, I'm moving back to make everything optimized now, like building the UI and the state management using block instead of GitX, or Riverbod if I see anything new about it. So this is my advice for everyone, just starting. Build the thing that you imagined and then later optimize it. This is like the rule number one for software.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything that you want to plug before we sign off, like maybe the company you're working at or your projects that you're working on or anything like that?
I didn't really talk much about the work at the first, but currently I'm working in the blockchain ecosystem with Rust and other tooling, Wisdom for example, and Web. So my current project I am working on called Web, which is a lot of things actually. For one of them, just a crypto mixer, so you can do mix crypto between your crypto in the mixer itself. Maybe I guess you don't have much idea about it, and really it's hard to explain. But nonetheless, if you see, for example, Bitcoin, of course, everyone knows Bitcoin. When you send a transaction between one account to another account, this transaction is recorded in the blockchain, and everyone could see this guy sends this guy one Bitcoin, for example. In web, what we are trying to build, it is not really Bitcoin, it's just different thing. But the real idea about this, I put money in the mixer, and then I could withdraw this money from the mixer, and the transaction that happens in the blockchain itself, you don't really know which money is which, and you can see the transaction goes through, and that's how you mix your crypto. Make it harder to track actually. This is not just for
Okay, I see.
mixing crypto itself. There is already a governance, a decentralized governance could use this to vote for things. There's a lot of use cases.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, and everything just
Okay,
written in
Shady.
Rust and Wasm. Okay.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for your time. We went a little bit over time. I hope I didn't cause any problems for you. I think it's about 5 p.m. for you right now, 5 something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, It's great having you on here. I think I would love to have you back to talk more about what you learned about the Dart VM because that's super interesting to me, like how the whole thing works. If you have some
Yeah, cool.
time or if you're interested in that, we could talk about that. So feel free to reach back to me if you have something you want to discuss. I'm more than happy to have you back on because I think, I love what you do. I'm also interested in Rust. I also use Flutter all the time. So this kind of stuff is very interesting to me, and I think it's also interesting for the community
Thank
to
you.
also know about. Thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you
Okay,
too.
see you next time.
Have a good day. Bye.